I've come to the belief that part of the story of the drug overdose crisis, rising crisis, is really a story about the way that American society changed in the last 40 years. And ironically, like some of the changes were things that people support, right? Like we became a much less socially repressive society. People have a lot more personal freedom. But what that has meant is, right, and this is from Patrick Deneen, is the professor at Notre Dame whose book Why Liberalism Failed. I think he says this best. Basically, at the end, what happened in the 70s was that liberalism kind of turned its attention to religion, family, community, and culture, and those are sources of social repression, but they're also sources of social connection. So why are people so unhappy? What's happening? We're much more isolated than ever. And it really starts in that time period, although it certainly gets worse once we get to iPhone, the iPhone in 2008. And today people you have a lost sense of purpose without these structures, less service to others. And so we've kind of lost some of these core things that anchored people, but also had negative effects, right? In that they were repressive. So I think we're struggling with coming up with models for how to hold people together and hold people in a stable way. And we've become just a very fragmented, isolated group of people in this country who are, which means a lot more risk for everybody. And certainly it's a complicated story because there's a socioeconomic component. It's certainly worse in the places where jobs aren't holding people together and giving people a sense of purpose. But I think that we have real work to do to reconstruct a framework that sustains people and keeps them on a healthier path and away from addiction and away from overdose risks.
Right. We're almost too quick and too metacognitive now to be able to believe the sort of that low resolution grand narrative that you need in order to bind communities together. Yet our honesty and individualism has sort of gotten us into trouble.
I just think, I think like, even if you're what's funny is like, I'm a modern person, but I do think that finding those connections, kind of putting a life together of meaning, whether you do it with yoga and Eastern thought, whether you do it in traditional, religion and Jewish, Christian, Muslim circumstances, I think that you need finding communities of connection and purpose is essential. And I think that's not a message that our society is teaching or promoting. And I think that's part of it's not the whole story, but I think that's a missing piece that would help us. And I think it also accounts for some of the differences between rates of overdose death and addiction, comparatively from the data that I've been able to see in other countries.
And it seems like the organizations that are quite powerful or at least well-funded, who are ostensibly there to provide help, the rigidity of those systems and the inability of those systems to meet those basic human needs that you were talking about seem to be part of the problem. I don't know if you have more to say about that.
I think that's right. I think we need to create new structures. I do think, by the way, I think we're seeing, in small instances, if you read like the Pew studies, the broad trend is that we've kind of walked away from some of the existing systems that we depended on, and there's a void that needs to be filled. But there are, my anecdotal observation is that and my belief is that one of the social responses to this crisis is going to be more people turning back to traditional religious structures. But I may be too far out over my skis in making that prediction.
Could you say a little more about why you think that is? Because I'm not a religious person. I wouldn't recommend somebody become involved with religion. However, there is something to be said about the very deeply interwoven community involvement of a religion. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more on that.
So I guess, just a couple of snapshots that for me, and I had the privilege of going down to the Saddleback Church and speaking to some of the pastors there about my book. And I was really struck, for me, I'm Jewish, and it was the first time I was ever really having in an evangelical setting. And I was struck that the messages, that's an example of a community that has embraced recovery and support and moved away from a theologically rigid or theologically heavy structure, meaning like you come in there and you're not kind of bombarded with religious messages that are foreign. And I can say that because I'm part of a different religion. Instead, the messages there are really like socially positive messages. The big sign on the wall behind, in front of while this band was playing was, "You are more than enough." And so I started looking at, as I went through their resources and started seeing that this is a community that has put together, grief groups for parents who have lost kids, for people who are suffering with medical conditions. They have all kinds of recovery community stuff going on, different, and there's just this enormous social action effort around that community. And so that's one example, but I can tell you, as I've been going around the country, I've been talking to Jewish community about models that need to be taken from that community. And I think one of the drivers of, for me, one of the signs of what leads people into addiction, one pathway is shame and stigmatization. And in some ways, what I see in that example, in other religious community, and I say this across having talked to people and across a lot of different religious groups, is that there's a lot of awareness that there is there's a really disturbing kind of level of shame that can happen around religious communities, and among many other things. And I think that awareness is leading towards a new generation. I think that's an example. Saddleback is an example of a new generation of religious community that's really oriented around attention to mental health and positive, non-shaming messages, and bringing people together and really providing practical resources. So I think we have a long way to go, but I'm encouraged. I think that faith communities are a bright spot and an opportunity for us to make some inroads on kind of rebuilding the missing pieces.
I think one of the points of confusion there is that religious text itself is dogmatic, objectively speaking, but religious communities are emergent and can be extremely helpful. It sounds like you're saying whatever the problem is with religion, the answer is not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The answer is to how can we incorporate the value that we were getting from religion and let whatever those positive things are meet the 21st century.
That's well said. And I don't think it's the whole answer. I just think it's one small piece of the puzzle. To
Sure.
me, it's abundantly clear that we just are missing. Our healthcare system and all the health policy in the world isn't going to fix this set of problems. And so the question is, where else do we look? And that's just one place. I'm a strong believer that we could really be doing a lot more in our school system, in our in the workplace, and hopefully in civic community. Although it can sometimes be discouraging when you look at the level of polarization
Sure.
When it comes. So and disengagement. So anyway, so that's just one place where I went looking for solutions.
And sorry, I should remind people, if they don't remember from 5 minutes ago, you brought this point up quickly and humbly, and I made you linger on it. So you're not preaching religion as the only way. It's very clear. I do wonder though what you have a really nuanced perspective on groups like NA, and so I wonder if the same principles would apply, or the same philosophy would apply, in terms of the things about AA or NA that have been harmful to people in the past or maybe currently. I wonder if there's a restructuring that's able to be done internally for groups like that to preserve what's helpful about them in terms of the community context.
Yeah, no, so it's funny. My early immersion into addiction treatment as a lawyer came by being embraced by abstinence-based programs. California, as I said, has been one of the homes of that of 12-step and social model recovery. So I personally know literally dozens, if not hundreds, of people who are alive today and are like who attribute the turnaround in their lives and their sustained recovery and they basically owe their lives to 12-step, to AA, to NA. So I tried to be, and on the other hand, you do see part of the story of the last, of the challenge of why we don't have really evidence-based treatment is because those communities weren't constructed to really build an evidence-based approach to addiction. And it really, and again, that partly is a story of what insurance companies weren't paying for it, so that nobody was actually paying attention to what was effective or not effective. And the reality is it's only a solution for some people, and we have people dying left and right. And to me, we I think there's a lot of good in those communities, and I don't think that that we should denigrate them. I think part of the challenge is there's like it goes back to that binary point, right? We have a lot to learn from recovery community. At the same time, I think we do need to talk about redefining what success looks like in a way that's broader and that keeps more people alive. So if somebody is using less, or to use a different drug, you take somebody who was using heroin, which translates to a very short life expectancy, and get them to use cannabis, or you get somebody to simply getting people onto medication-assisted treatment, you are keeping people alive and hopefully creating the opportunity for them to rebuild their life. I think the challenge with AA and NA is a very narrow definition of what success looks like, right? Abstinence and sobriety, and that's for the people who have been helped by that. That's incredible. But I think we need to, as a society, get to a broader number of pathways that keep people alive, that are just more inclusive, because otherwise it's just the standards are tough. And I think there is slowly a sort of a gradual acceptance in NA, for example, that MAT, medication-assisted treatment, is a viable path. That just because you're taking, Suboxone, buprenorphine, or methadone, it doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that you are somehow a failure or not really part of the conversation. By the way, there's a nuance between AA and NA that I think that people who are NA products really have much more balance, in my experience, than some of the sort of purity that people have experienced in the AA community.